probably had the most fun with it on the ship, to be honest, and that's how I
Okay.
ended my time on the airplane. So the idea was that we were going to go and deploy onto HMS Illustrious. This was beginning of 2000 to do an exercise called Link Seas. We were going to work with the French, Bay of Biscay, and do some cooperative work. Probably, the plan was certainly to cross deck, to go and land on the Charles de Gaulle, to land on their carrier. All of this, I was actually involved with this. I did a meeting with the French when we were alongside in Brest, halfway through the exercise. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But the bottom line is we were going to deploy. The ship had just been on ops. It had done its Iraq overflight deployment with the Sea Harriers. So it had been down in the Gulf. It came up through Suez. It came into the Med. At this point, the ship's had a very long cruise, and it went into Grand Harbour in Malta, which is where we flew out as passengers. Actually, VC-10. The vast majority of us, the squadron, goes to Malta on a VC-10, gets on the Illustrious, and the jets flew to Sardinia. We sailed from Grand Harbour in Malta. Very, very grand. The Navy do put a good show on when they leave port and when they come back in as well. We weren't allowed to play any part in that at all because what do we know? And we're just scruffy looking Air Force blokes. So we were told absolutely nobody is to come up on top. So the ship starts to rumble, off we go, and then when we're allowed out, it's just sea. It's just okay, we're off. And then the jets flew on. I think it was the next day, or maybe late that day. I can't remember. But the jets flew from Sardinia onto the boat, and that was us, and where we went. And the idea was to do a 2-week workup in the Mediterranean, and then stop off in Gibraltar. Mainly for collecting, just collecting stuff, because obviously the ship runs out of food, it runs out of red wine, it runs out of toilet roll, it runs out of everything. So a resupply in Gibraltar and then into Bay of Biscay for 2 weeks. Now, this is beginning of 2000, so the weather in Biscay is never that good, let alone in like March. So off we go. The weather's atrocious. We didn't turn a wheel. But very quickly, we got wind of something happening in Africa. And somebody mentioned Sierra Leone. And it was almost like that apocryphal story when the Falklands kicked off and somebody looks on a map and goes, is that near Shetland? We had no idea where Sierra Leone was. It's kind of, no, it's in sort of central West Africa. What have we got to do with that? Well, we don't really know yet, but we're off. So we about faced and started steaming south, did another resupply and collected a few more ships to put a fleet together to go down to Sierra Leone, and off we went. And this exercise, Link Seas, I mean, that was just forgotten about. But we'd gone from an exercise footing, thinking 4 weeks on the ship and then back home, to operations. And overnight, it just turned, on a sixpence to, we're on ops now. Potentially we're going to be flying over Africa. We've got to think about all that operational stuff. So we've got to think about the what ifs. We've got to think about, has anybody, we've got to sanitize our flying suits and stuff. We're flying, completely badged. It's a peacetime exercise, right? So we've got to go down the whole, sanitization route. Are we weapons current? We're going to be flying armed. So we used to fly over Bosnia, with a Walther. Holstered, sidearm. We've got to. Are there even any in the armory on the ship? Well, luckily, because it had done Iraq. Well, yes, there were, but we've all got to maintain weapons currency. So we all went and shot off the side of the boat to get current and all that sort of stuff. All these things start kicking in, but. To be honest, it wasn't kind of, it was more like kind of, okay, right. Well, this is the, the business we're in. What was impressive though, was, how the system, and not only the system on the ship, but the system back home, just, geared itself up to supporting us on operations. Even things like silk escape maps for Sierra Leone came out of nowhere. They just arrived in the post. I mean, it was just,
Right.
crikey.
Yeah.
So somebody back in London or wherever, had gone, right, I think the boys need this, combat survival waistcoat. So, well, they're on the ship. to support the Sea Harriers. Luckily, there's a lot of commonality between the gear and all that sort of stuff. So it all came together, and then woke up one morning and boom, Africa is literally 5 miles over there. It's Freetown Harbour. And we set to, and we were doing presence flights, in other words, just making noise, because we didn't have any weapons on board per se. Certainly not the sort of stuff that we would have liked to have had to do the job we were being asked to do, which was potentially drop ordnance on bad guys coming through the jungle and attacking Freetown and the airport and the parachute regiment, who were fortuitously for the operation, they were on the ground, but they were like, manning the Alamo. I mean, they were literally on the the outskirts of the airfield and in Freetown itself. And so our job was to come in and supply air support. Simple as that. So that was it. But that was novel. That was a really novel sort of way of life. But life on the ship was, again, I loved it, to be honest. I absolutely kind of from day one just went, wow, this is incredible. I'm probably never going to do this again. I mean, this is it was so rare that a ship deployment would come around for the force. I just sort of went, oh crikey, this could be one off. This could be and it's really impressive. Carrier operations is it's an impressive way of operating, and personally I thought it was probably the best way of operating the Harrier at the time. We weren't doing field deployments. We were doing, Italy for the Balkans. But the Carrier just gives you that ability to sit just over the horizon and project air power. Really quite impressive stuff, And I just got on. I got on with it like a house on fire. I mean, it was just, I really enjoyed flying off the front. The first time I landed, the first time you land on the Carrier, that you really don't have an option to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
But you know how to hover, you know how to land one of these things vertically. But with the ship, I find it easier, not easy, don't get me wrong, but easier in so much as in the hover there's a whole superstructure to your right which you just formate on, and as long as you formate in the right place, you can pick any reference you like.
Makes sense, yeah.
And you just you go, well, I'm landing on spot 4 or whatever it is, right, there's I'm a beam my spot, right, and as long as that picture out there doesn't move, I'm in the right place. You move across and you come on down. And I just after the first time I landed, the adrenaline obviously is high no matter how many times you do it, but I got Elvis wobble in my legs after I'd landed. My legs were I was just, proper adrenaline kind of shaking, such that I could barely taxi. And taxiing on a ship, you don't half-heartedly just maneuver across the deck. It's either full right rudder, i.e. nose wheel steering, or full left. It's nothing in between. You see, there's loads of videos of F-18s and stuff taxiing on deck and stuff, and they don't mess around either. Nobody does. The deckhand wants you to go full right or full left. Well, when you've got a wobble on your legs and you try and get full right, and you are the adrenaline really, and you've got to get out of the way because there's a guy behind you who wants to land where you've just landed. So it's that was kind of introduction to deck operations, but there were some really, really funny bits on the ship, and I remember I remember being on. It's a place called Goofers. It's about halfway up the superstructure, as was, and you could stand there, and you'd be almost a beam, the level of the guys in the hover, and you could stand there with your cup of tea and you could watch what's going on. And I remember this one particular day, I just happened to be. We're talking about references and stuff. I just happened to be standing where Sammy Sampson was formating on. So he's in the hover, and he's looking forward, and then he's looking right, and he's looking forward, he's looking right, and every time he looks right, he's looking at me, and I sort of go, well, he's obviously just looking at the superstructure, but I happen to be that stood there. So I've got my cup of tea, and and then he looks, and I like give him a little wave like that, and he didn't wave back, obviously, but no. he nodded, and I went, I wonder what happens if I move, because if he's formatting on me, so he looks forward, and I hop about 3 foot to my left, and sure enough, he goes back in the hover, and I go, oh my God,
Really?
he's literally,
Forming it on you.
Yeah. And I go, oh crikey, well I better hop back to where I was. So he looks forward, and I go back to where I was, and then he like goes forward in the hover, and thought nothing of it. And I went, right, I'm not messing around with this, right? I thought, I wonder if, and sure enough, that happened. And anyway, I saw him afterwards. I said, so why was your hover reference then? And he goes, yeah. And I said, so you didn't notice me like hop 3 foot to my left then? And he goes, oh, that's what that was. Because he's fat, dumb and happy in a steady hover. And
yeah,
I said, yeah, I'm really sorry. I didn't think you'd move. And he goes, you idiot. And I went, well, yeah. But the one that really stands out was our briefing room was at the front of the ship. I mean, they literally just, shoved us right down the front. It's where the anchor was banging on the front, and it wasn't the best briefing room at all. And it was under the ramp. So every time something launched, literally, well, one deck above us was the flight deck. So every time something launched, it was like being in a bell and somebody banging with a hammer. I mean, it was noisy in that briefing room. But at the back of the briefing room, there was a door which went out onto the forecastle, which is, where the anchor chains come out and all this sort of stuff. And it's at the front, just in front of the ramp. So it's the pointy end, obviously highly technical naval term, but it's at the pointy end, and it's a little deck, and it was just literally out the back of our briefing room. And I thought, oh, I wonder, what it's like to be on the forecastle when a jet goes off the front, and there's an element of boredom sort of creeps in as well. There's not that much to do on board. You kind of run out of things to do, so you start inventing. Well, wouldn't it be a jolly JP if we try and find the crow's nest? Assuming there's even a crow's nest, so off we go and try and find the highest bit of the ship that we can actually get access to, and all this sort of stuff. And it's just, you start inventing, little things you want to go and do. Yeah. And I went out on this one particular day to the forecastle, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to stand here. I wonder what it's like, a jet goes off the. I mean, no air defenders on there, nothing. I just stood there with got my mug of tea, and I got my thumbs in my ears like that, with holding this cup of tea, and I hear the jet spool up, and I go, oh, here we go, and I've got my back to the ramp, so the ramp is above my head, right. And I stand there, and the jet goes to the top. Oh my God! It was like nothing I'd ever experienced ever. I mean, why would it be? I mean, how often do you stand behind a jet engine, right? But I get slammed back into the wall. I shut my eyes, deafening. I mean, these don't do anything when it comes to that amount of sound. And off we go, and you feel the heat and the blast and everything else. Off it goes. I open my eyes, and it's away in front of me. Whoa, crikey! Right, I'm not doing that again. So I go back into the briefing room, and I go, guys, you'll never guess. Whoa, Matt, stop shouting, mate. What? And it was, honestly, I got ringing in my ears. I was shouting. No tea in my mug. That's on the deck. I smell, and they say I'd gone like sort of semi-black. I mean, it was soot, basically. I stunk of burnt jet fuel. And I just went, you got to stand out the front. It's amazing. Whoa, hang on. Whoa, God. What? I just stood out on the front, you idiot. But it was indicative of life on board, really. And I think, if you speak to any Navy guys as well, there's always part of the ship which, there's stuff that goes on that, is just, it comes from an element of boredom. It comes from an element of, completely, this is a unique thing that I'm doing. I'm never going to be able to do this again.
Get the most out of it.
It was, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was, so it was not so much, something that happened in the airplane. It was, there's some serious stuff happening in the airplane. There's some really funny stuff that happened in the airplane, but it was life as well that went with it. It was, there was a uniqueness to it all that I'm, will be eternally grateful for being part of. Because, it was a major part of my life, for which I am eternally grateful, and I thank my lucky stars almost on a daily basis. I mean, it was part of my extremely varied career path, but the most unique part of it, without a doubt. And I as I say, I'm just so happy and so grateful for having been given the opportunity to do it, and also for the the bits and pieces that I did. Not everybody got to be boat qualified. You could go two tours and not get boat qualified. I mean, if it didn't come around, it didn't come around.